Hi, everyone, and welcome to Fostering Equity in the Visual Arts, a discussion. We have live transcriptions on Zoom. If you would want to turn those on in the usual way, you can just go to your Zoom menu at the bottom and then add your view your live subtitles. We also have interpretation and by the BSL interpreter. I wonder if we can try and spotlight Samaya, if that's possible, because I think that might be helpful. And if I could ask you all to, as you're coming in, make sure that your microphone is off. That'll be really helpful as well. So please feel free to have your camera on or off, get comfortable, and have this as a relaxed space as much as you can. If you'd like to do so, then please change your name and add your pronouns as well. So yeah, as we're all getting settled in, this is the second of our events, reflecting on the Contemporary Visual Arts Network's Fair and Equitable Programme Research Report. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, especially on this balmy and hot Monday evening. I'm Dr. Cecilia and I am the lead for the CVAN Fair and Equitable Programme's pilot phase that's running from September 21 until 22. Today, I'm joined by some wonderful guest contributors: Saad Eddine-Said, Artistic Director and CEO of New Art Exchange, Zarina Mohammed of the White Pube, and Dr. Kai Syng Tan, Artist, Curator, Consultant and Academic. I thought actually that I should probably do a visual description of myself, and I wonder if our speakers could also do the same. I'm a East Asian woman with bob length hair, and I am wearing glasses and looking a bit more tan than usual, sitting on a sofa that is orange and red checked. Maybe would Kai like to give a visual description? Just so
Hi, my name is Kai, she, her pronouns, and I am also an East Asian woman, not wearing my glasses currently. Look quite washed out because I'm sitting by the window, not my usual skin color. And yeah, and I guess that's it.
Thank you, Kai. Saad or Zarina?
Okay, should I go for it? Yeah, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Saad. I am a male. My pronouns are he and him. Around 1.80 meters, slightly skinny, with a beard and curly hair. Also, a tan that is way beyond usual because I'm at the moment in Fes in Morocco and it's very sunny. So I do apologize if my connection is a bit weak now and then.
Thank you, Saad. We can hear you well, though, so we're just hoping that that's going to continue.
Great.
Hello, I'm Zarina and I use she, her pronouns. Visual description, I am medium brown. I have my hair slicked back into a little bun so that you can see the shape of my head. I'm wearing a black tank top and gold chain and AirPods. And I look sweatier than normal. I'm in like a blank white room, half the sun's on me. Yeah.
Thanks, Zarina. And today we have interpreting from Samaya Tayyib, and I'm going to try and spotlight Samaya. and also myself as I'm going to do some introductions to this session. So as you may know, we are recording this session and we're going to put the video onto the website as well as post it on social media. So before I talk about the purpose and structure of today's event, I wanted to share our community participation guidelines, and I hope you don't mind if I read these out. So these community participation guidelines have been offered as part of the Fair and Equitable programme, and they're written by myself, Cecilia, with support from Vienna, Spain. So we hope that everybody understands that adhering to the community guidelines is a collective responsibility, and that everyone is individually responsible for checking their own behaviour. And if you'd like to add to the list or amend it, then please drop a message to us in the chat. You can contact my colleague, Rukhsana, and she is one of the hosts of this meeting. If you'd like to do so, you can DM her, or myself as well. So firstly, ableism, homophobia, racism, sexism, transphobia, or prejudice based on ability, asylum status, class, ethnicity, gender, gender presentation, nationality, or religion is not welcome here. Nationality, religion. Oops, somebody's, thank you. Someone's got an echo going on. Respect everyone's identity and background, including pronouns and names. Do not assume anyone's gender identity or sexual preference, survivor status, economic or immigration status, background, health, etc. Respect everyone's physical and emotional boundaries and check in before discussing topics that may be triggering. Respect that there are varying opinions, beliefs, experiences, and privileges, as well as different ways of learning and interacting. Power dynamics exist here in this space. Please be aware of the space that you take up, your assumptions and prejudices, and allow for space for all voices to participate. Make every effort not to judge, look down on, or enter into competition with others. Be responsible for your own actions and the language that you use. Be aware that your actions and language have an effect on others, despite what your intentions may be. Take collective and individual responsibility for creating a safer space for everyone. Work together to foster a spirit of mutual respect. Listen to the wisdom that everyone has to share. Be kind with your words and give generously to allow everyone time and space to speak and share their thoughts and ideas. Ask questions before assuming. The best way to understand the choices, actions, or intentions of one another is by asking. Respect the person and challenge the behavior. And the rules still apply if you're under the influence of drugs or alcohol. I just wanted to say thank you to the artist and activist, The Vacuum Cleaner, also to Allied Media Projects and Soulfire Farm, whose work has informed these community participation guidelines. And I also wanted to add that this event may include references to racism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, and classism. So, whew, let's just all take a breath after that. So, I wanted to say a little bit about the format of the event. We're going to start with a couple of introductions and about the Fair and Equitable programme and the research report. And then I'll invite each of our guest contributors to come in and they will speak about one of the themes in the report. We will then have a short comfort break about halfway through the event, And after that, there'll be some time for discussion between guest contributors, picking up on points made, as well as time for responses from yourselves, the audience, and comments to the guest contributors. So please add your questions and comments to the chat, and feel free when the time comes to use the hand function if you would like to speak, or you can also use your emojis. We encourage all of those things. So just over a month ago, we launched the Fair and Equitable Programme research report with an Instagram live event, and you can find the report, which is called Fostering Equity in the Visual Arts Sector, on CVAN's website. And I think Rukhsana might be able to put a link to that in the chat. And so I co-wrote that with Vinela Spain, who was also working on the programme earlier in the programme's, earlier in the programme. So the Fair and Equitable Programme is a 5-year programme and commitment to instituting equity within the visual arts in England. And its aim is to bring together experts and professionals to set the future agenda and lead sectoral change. So, as I mentioned before, the pilot research and development phase is running from last September until September 22. And we're really focusing on intersectional practice and the barriers and opportunities for artists and arts workers from marginalized and underrepresented communities, namely people who identify as part of global ethnic majorities, disabled and deaf and neurodivergent, LGBTQIA+, migrant and working class communities. So some of the activities as part of the programme to date include contributing to CVAN's organisational development, including working with CVAN's 9 regions and convening group equity coaching sessions with managers and directors from those 9 regions. We also undertook a survey of individuals earlier this year, which I'll come back to. We've also undertaken research conversations with artists and arts workers from marginalised and underrepresented communities. And we've been developing partnerships and our social media presence. And in terms of forthcoming activities, we have a professional development programme for artists who are based in the Northwest, which is called Embracing Possibilities, and that's going to be happening in August. And we will also be launching some public learning events in September. They are called Making Time for Equitable Change. So if you want to be on our mailing list, then please join, and the link, I think that Rukhsana is going to put the link into the chat. But back to the report. So the report aims to share findings from our research, particularly the Fair and Equitable survey of individuals. So it was a survey of artists and arts workers from marginalised communities in England that we undertook earlier this year, and we got 202 responses. The report also draws on existing research and work in the broader context of equity, diversity and inclusion in the arts and cultural sector, including some amazing research and reports from organisations and initiatives such as Ink Arts, Migrants in Culture, Nuke Collective's Manifesto, the DAX Manifesto, and also the Creative Majority Report. So some of the emerging themes which we hope to discuss today that we found in the report and spoke about there were on intersectionality, structural conditions, hopes for the future, stages of career, and building cultures of belonging and the power to make change. Just a few small little things then. The report aims to acknowledge and value the experiences, knowledge and skills that artists from marginalised and underrepresented communities bring to visual arts sector. And instead of framing these communities as being in deficit or as beneficiaries, we as authors of the report really wanted to highlight issues of rethinking and resourcing and the need for both collective as well as individual action. So the key question guiding the report is, what interventions need to be made within the visual arts sector in England so that artists and arts workers from underrepresented and marginalised communities, specifically those from global ethnic majorities, disabled, deaf and neurodivergent, LGBTQIA+, working class and migrant communities, what do these communities need to thrive? So today we want to delve further into the report's themes and recommendations. And I'd like us, as in the speakers, myself, as well as you, the audience, to think through the issues arising and what still needs to be addressed. So we want to, speaking now to our guest contributors, we encourage your thoughts and provocations about how to foster equity. And I'm going to be inviting you all to think about the themes, quotes, ideas, recommendations in the report that really resonate with you, as well as thinking about what is missing from the report and where do we need to be more challenging in relation to equity, diversity and inclusion. And so we really want to create a space for discussion between our contributors and the audience. I'm not asking our contributors to come up with any answers or solutions to the issues, but maybe it's more about having the opportunity to unpack and delve into some of the things that we might not get to discuss in other contexts. I feel like I've spoken for quite a long time now, and I wonder if I could invite our first contributor, if Saad, you are there.
Hi, Cecilia.
Hi. I might try and spotlight you.
Great.
Over
Oh, cool. But thank you for having me here, Cecilia. Thanks a lot for having me here. I'm very excited. Yeah, just to come and share some of my reflections and what the kind of research got me to reflect about. And first, I just wanted to start by expressing how grateful I know many people are about this research and this report. It's so timely and came really at the right time, and it is very much needed. And I think from my end, the report got me to think quite a lot about unconscious bias and where we as a collective, as a society, unconsciously define the world and its kind of like power structure. And we often draw a picture of who gets to be on the top and who gets to be at the bottom. And we need to, we'll take a moment to kind of pause and recognize more widely that we often regurgitate answers to questions that don't even get to be asked. When we talk about leadership, we can all close our eyes and consciously think about what that person looks like, what gender they have, what color, culture, etc. And I think one of the things that really came out from the research, from the conversations that we had previously, and from my own reflection on the writing, is that we kind of like to stay in our comfort zone and speak often about change that needs to happen elsewhere. And I think fostering equity in the visual arts as a report for me reminds us of two really essential things. The first one is that change won't happen unless we change. It starts within. And I think the sector overall will not change the world before it changes itself. And we all know that it has all the assets, all the tools, all the energy to really reshape what that future is going to look like. But we do need to look within and what we can do to change ourselves first. And then the second thing is that there is an exceptionally more exciting reality, opportunity, and potential once we as a sector can come together and look at the horizon beyond societally constructed bias. Change and equity are not scary or difficult. They're actually very exciting. But what's scary is that we as a sector need to be self-critical for this to happen. Our biggest barrier is us, all of us as a collective. And I think really for me, that stood out from everything that was written in the report. So how do we kind of shift this dynamic? And one could argue that the answer is pretty simple. We need to build a generation of art workers, creatives, and leaders a new generation who is connected to the reality of the communities that we want to serve and represent. And we know that maybe the sector today doesn't really represent or reflect those communities. So what we need to do is deconstruct and reconstruct. And this is why one of the aspects of the research that resonated profoundly with me and with my personal journey within the UK, being a migrant, someone who came to the UK 5 years ago and started from being a volunteer to where I am today, and having gone through all the stages of my career, is the building equity in all stages of career, so that development and self-fulfillment becomes accessible to all. And as I was kind of reflecting on the very useful and comprehensive recommendations, which I thought were all excellent, I couldn't stop myself about thinking of one of my biggest barriers when I came here and I encountered during the different stages of my career in the UK. And that was language, the semantics, and the essence of what each word means and who defines it, and understanding that words are very subjective depending on who gets to define them. So my questions here and my reflections: what is talent and what does it look like? What is quality? What is excellence, relevance? What makes a work worthy of being classified as a world class? And who gets to define and for whom? What is experience? What is expertise? What is leadership and what is community? What is value and worth? Is it about the ideas that we express, or is it about the language that we use? Is it about our color, culture, gender, sexuality, and so on? Or is it about our creative asset and what we bring to the table? And I really wanted to share those thoughts here, because when we talk about barriers, there are so many invisible barriers that are stopping progress and that are making the reimagining of our world through the lenses of fairness and equity a real challenge, a challenge of our time and of our society. But there are also so many exceptional recipes for the visual art sector to succeed in this journey. And after reading the report, I believe that this report is one of those really tangible and exciting recipes. So I'm very grateful for the research that you've done, very grateful for all the tangible recommendations. And I think we should really, as a sector, come and take time to really reflect about this report. We have a lot of challenges in front of us, but as I said, there are so many excellent recipes there. And yes, we can do the change. It is difficult, but we can come together and achieve that. So thank you, Cecilia, for having me in.
Thank you, Saad. Thank you so much. And yeah, thanks for sharing your journey, and also for like highlighting this issue of, yeah, the issue of the really important issue of language barriers, and definitions, like how all of this gets defined and how we need to change the composition of this as well as the language. I might, like, hopefully your internet's going to hold up. It seems to be fine so far, fingers crossed. Because it'd be great to unpack and go further into some of these questions that you're kind of like bringing, and you know, think about like, yeah, why changes, what stops change from happening, I think is one of the questions that I have. And thanks also for like being so positive about the report. Yeah, so I am gonna see if Zarina is around. Hey, Zarina. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hello. Let me try and find you. Hi.
Oh, okay.
I'm spotlighting you.
Nice. Okay. All right, ready? Shall I get going?
Go for it. Hit it.
Take it away. Hello, everyone. I am Zarina Mohammed. I am an art critic / writer. I am one half of, I was about to say the team behind the White Pube, which makes me sound very corporate, and we are not very corporate, but I'm one half of the White Pube, which is the collaborative identity between myself and my co-founder, Gabrielle de la Puente. It's a website. We write about art and video games and other bits of pop culture generally, not just pop culture, culture at large. We publish a text every week on Sundays. You can find us at thewhitepube.com or on Twitter and Instagram at thewhitepube. That's pube with a P, because it still keeps happening. We've been up and running since like 2015, and still to this day, I will say the white pube at people and they'll be like, the white cube, oh wow. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, like, no, yes but no. So that's me, that's the position I'm speaking from. I'm like very much a critic, which is an interesting person to, I don't know, throw onto this panel, because I'm kind of in and out at the same time. Critics, right? We've got vested interests. We can have an opinion, but we're not really involved in like the process of making things in the art world. Like, we just got a lot of opinions about how people should, armchair pundits basically. But I think that's like quite an interesting position. I think it's a position that I'm like quite keen to lean into. So that's where I'm speaking from today. I'm going to chat mostly about structural conditions, just because that is the subject in the report that has most been on my mind. Probably for the past, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years, I've been writing in and around that as a topic for quite a long time, and you can probably find the backlog of that writing on the White Pube if you have a nosy around. I think if anything I say today maybe doesn't make sense, have a look on the site. I'm a lot more eloquent in writing than I am in live in person, live and direct. I'm just going to chat through some of the points in the report and like give you my takes. So I think I found it quite interesting to read through this report and see a lot of things that I kind of already knew, already thought, and had already seen in action, spelt out in quite like a, not forensic, like in a bad Keir Starmer way, like in like a kind of limpy way, like it wasn't flat, but it was just quite, it was written in quite a clear, concise, quite direct way, which is interesting for the art world, because I think often the way that we speak to each other fosters speaking at cross purposes, right? Like we can get quite het up in like the academic theory and like the I don't know, the art speak of it all. This was laid out really, really clearly, like this happens, bullet points. So I thought it was really interesting to kind of read through specifically the structural conditions section. I'm just going to read out bits because I'm aware that not everyone watching will have read through the report. But there is a point about how artists and art workers from marginalized backgrounds were more likely to leave the sector during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that's interesting. I think it also rings true with my experience and what I've known of the art world over the past 7-ish years. I think the art world has always had a problem with retention rather than recruitment. So, for instance, over the past couple of years, as a response to the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of larger galleries have invested quite a lot of time, effort, and money in recruitment drives to try and make their workforce a lot more visually diverse, and like diverse front of house, diverse curatorially. That has been like part of their efforts and their commitments that they pledged in like a couple of years ago. I think it's interesting to see that move a couple of years ago within the wider history of diversity policy, because this has obviously been, diversity policy has existed since like the 70s, and people have been writing about institutional lack of diversity since the 70s, and institutions have been committing to increasing diversity since the 70s. And it's work that kind of continues on from a point of beginning without ever kind of reaching a conclusion. I thought it was quite interesting to read it within a contemporary context. Like, yeah, people are leaving the sector because of the pandemic. When people have been, that's I think the most current iteration of it. Like, I think people have been, the art world has an issue with retention rather than recruitment, and there have been consistent drives to recruit, and very little in terms of action to make the sector a more hospitable environment for people from all marginalized backgrounds, whether that be like along the axis of like race, class, whatever. I think the report does an interesting job identifying really concisely like the specific pressure points that like maybe that hostile environment like takes place on, like the specific grounds, like precarity, low pay, insufficient resources, and undervalued work. In my experience and from my point of view as a critic, maybe this is like this comes from my position. So maybe it's like a value judgment rather than an objective truth. But I think those problems are part of a wider core issue with the shape of institutions and how they literally work. I think structures and governance are not sexy words, they're not sexy themes, they're not very like spectacular. But governance is literally just about the way an organization goes about running itself. It's like literal shape. I think addressing those problems could be about, they could take any form. It could be about improving internal recruitment for curatorial jobs. So like once you get these people in through your like diversity scheme, where do they go? Is there any kind of ability to have job progression? Often that is a problem. Like they get people in on diversity schemes and they just kind of stay there doing like a really long work experience or like internship. So internal recruitment is really important. Again, really unglamorous. It could also be about like paying front of house staff the same as like back office curatorial staff, like that weird class divide that happens within institutions of like who's on the desk and who's behind the desk in the back of the office. And it could also be about the way that institutions work with artists, because this isn't just about arts workers or people on payroll. There is like a specific precarity that artists experience in like the way they take on and have to work, the way they take on jobs and have to go about the act of working. I think it's like absolutely wild to me that like artists don't have any significant income beyond like the institutional interactions they have and like maybe teaching. So many artists have to rely on external sources of income like day jobs or family or like inherited independent wealth. And so being an artist is, yeah, just this really elitist profession. Elitist profession? That's not what I mean to say. What I mean to say is it's a profession that favors the already rich. I think as well, it's interesting to hear a suggestion about consulting, listening to like literally asking people, hey, what's going on? What can we do to make your life better? I think it's interesting to see that against the backdrop of, again, an institutional move to maybe be more inclusive and open and investing a lot of effort and time into the language and the appearance of progression. I think there is something to be said that's lacking for like stakes and like skin in the game. Over the past couple of years, institutions have been consulting as a circular discussion that doesn't really go anywhere. I think, in my opinion, what they need to do is start implementing things. I know that's easier said than done. Institutions are notoriously slow. I think that point is kind of about governance. They're big and heavy. They're not really nimble. They're not able to act in the way that individuals or smaller, scrappier organizations can. I think, yeah, that returns to the point about governance. And so I've got like a wider question about who this report is intended for, because in my mind, I think I can read this and be like, yeah, cool, I agree with all of that. Preaching to the choir with me, but I would be quite interested to see what this does in the email inbox of the directors of NPOs and what they would think of it, whether they would actually take it on board, whether there's any ability to push for changes beyond suggestion, like beyond just like leaving this on their desk, like on their inbox, their in tray. What can we do to like hold them accountable to make these changes? Finally, I'm going to end because I'm not sure how long I've been yakking for, but I think it might be too long. But I'd just like to suggest that I was most interested in the suggestion to join campaigns for increased funding and resources within the arts, because over the past decade or so of conservative governments, consecutive conservative governments, that has been a consistent trend. Arts funding and spending for culture, amongst other public services, has been consistently slashed to the bone. And I think most recently it appeared to me as like potentially a problem of complicity when, a couple of weeks ago, the V&A hosted a Conservative Party fundraiser, a gala. They had little fancy canapes. I read about it in the in my morning briefing from like the Politico playbook, which is like a full-on political journalist thing rather than like an arts coverage thing. I thought that was wild. That I understand, obviously, that it's like a vicious circle because there's no funding. It means you have to take on these silly little jobs like Tory party galas to raise money. You can't bite the hand that feeds you. But there is like there is a harsh divide between the complicity that directors of institutions and senior management in institutions are like for the positions that they are forced into, where they have to make difficult decisions, but they are also invited to consult government and advise on policy. That's something we saw specifically during the pandemic. They were invited to all party parliamentary groups and invited to inform on ways that the sector could be quite directly funded and kept afloat. And directors end up socializing with important people, not just politicians at galas and fancy fundraisers, but also with rich people generally. That's the whole point of a director. That's the point of the job, right? You're there to act as the front person for fundraising efforts. You're there to bring in money. Yeah, kind of provide creative leadership and like vision for the organization and like steer it, but you're also there to chat to rich people. And I think that lack of that complicity in state interests and conservative interests, specifically with the government we have at the moment, hopefully for not that long maybe, but with the government we have at the moment, that complicity is definitely for me the most interesting suggestion, because I think it would be an interesting thing to happen. Like, what if Maria Balshaw, in her capacity as the director of the Tate, did come out and have an opinion that was political. I'm not sure she's able to, but yeah, that's me.
Thank you so much, Zarina, for all of these this great kind of like all of these points about making sure that we really think about how the sector could be more hospitable, as well as definitely the relationship between operations and the divide, the unsaid divide between operations and artistic staff, and how unglamorous that question is in a way, as well as, yes, absolutely, complicity regarding funding. We've got lots to think about there, and I want to at some point later on in the event talk about this issue of like discussing and consultations as well. But yeah, thank you so much. Kai.
Yeah, great. So I have a day job. My name is that Zarina was referring to. So my day job is to teach in a university. I'm also a maker. So my name is Kai. And first of all, I just want to say thank you to Cecilia and her colleagues for putting the report together. It is a sobering read, but it also makes me question, why are we still here? So today my response will consist of a video that I've prepared, but I also have a couple of slides that I wanted to share. So shall we start with the video, Rukhsana, if that's okay?
Yeah, I'll just put that on now.
Thanks. There's no sound.
Are you crossed at the injustices of the world? Fed up at how normative standards have been substandard? Stop taking things lying down. Exercise your right to kick up a storm. Hi, I'm Kai. I'm a chimera octopussy, infused by ancient wisdom to reconnect the body with mind, soul with soul, the common with the cosmic. I'm hyperactive. I can't sit still, and I'm restless for change. 2050 is only one generation away, so we're running out of time. Slash your safety harnesses. Put on your tinter goggles. Join me in 8 tentacular workouts for a tantalizing future. Stretch your imagination. Reimagine a future that recenters creativity, diversity, and neurodiversity, celebrating our different brains, minds, beings, and possibilities. We've got our work cut out. Let's get our hands filthy. Are you ready?
Great, thank you. And could we have these slides, please? Thank you. And I'll be talking to the slides. So I've been thinking about the future, and it's really good to see the discussion of the future in the report and the talk about thriving. And I started to think about the future. I started to talk about the future because I got tired of responding to what's happening now. I got tired of complaining. So Rukhsana, can you go to the first slide, please? Is this the first slide? Okay, sure. So, which was why I made that film. And I made that film. I also put a deadline in the film, and I set it at 2050 to try to give some of the kind of goals a sense of accountability, like a sense of urgency. And I tried to think about how we can not just paint a kind of a blue sky picture, but the importance of using the body and embodying actions. So, which is something that I think is very important, and something that we can perhaps think about in terms of how we can, because Zarina was talking about how a report like this should be landing in the inboxes of certain institutions or certain organizations. And I'm thinking, yes, we should absolutely do that. And also ask specifically what sort of actions, concrete actions, not just talk, not just policies or promises, but actual actions that these organizations are going to take. So I want to also talk about a couple of other things that I am working on, and which also talk to the report. So there was discussion of the issue of not having a pipeline, and that's something we hear about a lot in terms of how we can't have people of color, people from racially diverse background at the top because there isn't a pipeline, etc. And one of the things I'm doing as an academic educator is to think about that really actively. And I am situated at a university, and one of the things I'm doing is to create a creative arts leadership course. And you can't see the title in the slides now, but there's a title that says Creative Arts Leadership. But basically what it's trying to do is to kind of take the notion of leadership back to the drawing board. As we can see all around us, there are really toxic notions of leaders, toxic notions of leadership, and also very toxic role models. So the course that I'm trying to do, which will start next year, is to take everything to the drawing board and to say, what are creative approaches to understanding leadership, and to curate it from an art school point of view. And in the process, I am extending tentacles to other disciplines. And in this example, I will be working with the business school. So it's about trying to connect with other sectors, other disciplines, to try to do this together. So it isn't just about trying to change the sector, and which Saad talked about in the beginning, which is so important because there's a lot of repairing and a lot of repairing and reflection to do, but it's also perhaps to do it with other sectors, with other disciplines and so on. So can we go to the next slide, please? Is there a next slide? Are we going to the next slide? Are the slides frozen, or maybe I'm frozen?
Maybe Rukhsana's having problems with her screen.
Okay, sure.
Not sure.
Sure. Another thing that was pointed out in the report that is really interesting is about the need to have proactive conversations. And I think that's really interesting in terms of the discussion of allyship. And maybe this is where I want to just raise something that I would like to maybe discuss, which is something that I've been thinking about, but I haven't really discussed it properly in public spaces. But it is about with regards to working with people who call themselves allies. And the discussion of allyship came up, of course, during the Black Lives Matter movement or resurgence in 2020. And I'm really interested to talk about that in terms of disability, in terms of neurodiversity. More than 1/7 of the general population is neurodivergent, meaning dyslexic, autistic, ADHD, and so on. And also that term is now often encompassing other processes of the brains and minds, including PTSD, etc. So I'm really keen to think about allyship for disabled artists. As a disabled artist, as a neurodivergent artist, I have been working with people to help me do things together.
So sorry to interrupt. I'm so sorry, Kai. My computer completely froze. So I've been
No, that's fine. That's
struggling
fine.
to get on. So sorry about that.
That's fine. Maybe we can get out of the slides. It's fine. I'll finish up in a minute anyway.
Sorry.
So I want us to maybe think about how we can reach out to neurodivergent artists, but also to think about how neurodivergent artists are working with so-called allies. I've been thinking about this quite a lot, and I think it's ultimately quite an ableist setup that we are having to work with support workers, etc. And often I'm thinking about having these so-called support workers and allies and so on to be teaching, to kind of flip things around, and for them to be teaching the industry as a whole about ways to do things in a more inclusive way. And why one of the kind of reasons for that is because the art and design sector is very neurodivergent. More than 1 in every 3 people are neurodivergent, and that's much higher than the wider population and much wider than other industries. So that's something interesting. But I'm also really interested in the notion of these kind of allies and support workers. It's like a kind of a cottage industry, and I'm keen to open that discussion up. And related to that, perhaps the report is really good. So the question that Zarina raised about who this report is reaching, and as part of that, I'm also keen to ask us if we're keen to reach out to neurodivergent people, and therefore with that also think about more visual formats, and also to think about them as much more practical toolkits and much more kind of action oriented approaches that could help to increase the uptake of responses. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kai. That's amazing. And thanks so much for your film as well, which was great. I really want to, I think we all probably want to come and do your course. Lots of really, yes, such important points that everyone's made. I feel like we should have a break now. So before we come back and discuss all together and get your questions as well, if people have questions, then please put them in the chat. And yeah, and I wonder if we could come back at 6 p.m. in 7 minutes time. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Hope you've had a good little break and a little stretch, or yeah, just like doing whatever you had to do at that time. Saad looks a bit more serious than he did earlier, which maybe means that we're all getting a bit hot and
got up a couple of degrees since earlier.
Oh, we've gotten hot and bothered.
Yes, precisely. Maybe it's because we're discussing all of these like really important and yeah, steamy issues. But
yeah, it's listening to everyone and all the good reflections.
Exactly. I wonder if we might start with a couple of thoughts or reflections from yourselves before we open up to some comments from the floor.
Yeah, some thoughts and reflections about what I've heard. I mean, the thing I've got with me, which is an ongoing question, is all the reports and all the talks have been ongoing for, I guess, for decades and for generations. And I think it's good to take a moment to say that we didn't figure out how to, well, action change on a bigger scale. And that's something that we need to crack at some point. I think one of the things that is good to also reflect on, and I don't want to have the expectation that everyone in the call or all the sector are getting their main funding from Art Council, but we do recognize that it's one of the biggest funders for arts and culture in the UK, and it's a funder that redistributes taxpayers' money. So it's a really important body to look at, and that through all the portfolio, through all the NPOs that we have, only 2.4% of the NPOs are global majority led. I think that's quite a shocking number in so many ways. And we're looking forward to seeing the next portfolio in October. And as much as we need to be really ambitious, we also need to be honest that there is still so much to do. And yeah, the ongoing question for me is, how do we go from talk to action?
Yeah, exactly. There's this issue of like, despite all of the investment in diversity over the years, including from Arts Council, there is still a lot to be done in terms of changing the leadership so that it is diverse led, as the Arts Council call it, and also that those organizations, once they are in place, continue to be resourced, because I think that has historically been a massive problem as well, as in the disinvestment of diverse led organizations is part of this, you know, our nation's history.
Right, and now we're talking about ethnicity, but obviously if we look at other underrepresented characteristics, I think that
it's even worse. In fact,
the picture is not good at all. Let's put it this way.
No, exactly. Yeah. Zarina or Kai, I wonder if there's something that the other speakers said that you wanted to respond to. Because I also have like loads of questions, but I thought that rather than taking the chair's prerogative again.
I'll let Zarina speak because I was the last speaker, so I
was going to say you go first because I feel like I spent ages yakking on. But yeah, I will go next. So I thought it was very interesting. I think it was very interesting to mostly read through the comments, and I think recently, like super recently, Joe Varon mentioned that disabled led even less, like in response to I think something Saad said. I think it's under 1.5%. Investment absolutely has to increase. And I think that's a really good point. I think the point you mentioned just now about how like the actual stats that the Arts Council release, I mean, I agree, it's not like the only source of investment, the only source of funding. I think it's, sorry, you can't hear the neighbours, can you? Okay.
No, we can't,
I
actually.
can.
All good.
I can, and it's distracting me, sorry. But what was I saying? Oh my God, I'm so sorry, 1 second. I think it's important to acknowledge that, yes, the Arts Council is not the only source of funding. However, it is a specifically British source of funding. Like it is the way that we expect our institutions to be funded, a really socially responsible, in my opinion, way to fund our institutions, because it helps us think about art as a public good, or the public value of art. I think that is fundamentally something worth investing in as a society, as I guess a group of people who pay taxes. I think it's important to then, that makes the case for representation in my mind. I think I can only really speak to the way I've invested a lot of my time thinking about the way that this like cuts along the lines of like race and that specific axis. But I think, Joe, yeah, making that point really reminded me that the stats are worse and like shit in other ways. Sorry, but it kind of, yeah, it's a bad time for everyone. That was the main thing I think I was responding to, or like that really kind of made my brain go ping when I stopped talking.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in and sort of note that, you know, as we mentioned in the report, like there is a concern that equality, diversity, inclusion, equity, diversity, inclusion work is currently being supported and funded and resourced to a certain extent, and that we don't know whether that's going to continue or to what extent there'll be recognition that actions need to be taken in order to create the changes that we need to create a more equitable sector. And I guess just thinking about this question of consultations and listening to artists and arts workers from marginalized communities, you know, the reason why we put that in there and how to kind of like think about that was really about about co-producing institutions rather than having those listening exercises as staying passive. And I suppose that kind of like connects to what you're talking about, Kai, when you're kind of like thinking about producing this new course and exploring different types of leadership that are not based on these toxic models.
Yeah, and also doing it with colleagues outside of the art sector. I think that is really, I talk about this in terms of the notion of tentacularity, like having tentacles. So it's us reaching out, but also having them reach in, but in order for them to learn more about how artists have always been leaderful for a really long, I mean, Sylvia Pankhurst, for example, she went to art school. She had 2 art degrees, and she's, of course, of the Pankhurst fame. So, yeah, I'm really interested to think about that. But also just what Saad and Zarina have pointed out. I think, and also the report points this out really clearly. It's the importance to think about intersectionality. So it shouldn't be about oppression Olympics. It shouldn't be about, okay, we need to shut down, we need to put aside race in order to talk about disability and so on. I mean, it's not a competition, like, and it's really good you preface this session with the community guidelines. It's not about competition. Why are we duplicating? Why are we replicating all the inequalities and all the inequitable forces outside? So, and there's a really striking quote in your report. The woke left wing, who mainly populate the art space, are the most intolerant and non-inclusive people I know. I mean, I could have written that, but I didn't write that. And that's on page 38 of your longer report. So yeah, I think that just kind of speaks for itself. I mean, we often think we're so liberal, and therefore we have so many blind spots that we don't think about. And it's for your report to point these facts out. I think that's so important. And then the question is, what next, right? I mean, why we, that's why I was asking in the beginning, why are we still here? So what next? What are the concrete steps? What are the milestones that we should reach?
Well, I guess, like, yes, I think that's what we're trying to figure out, because I guess, like, you know, trying to achieve change on a bigger scale is really difficult, particularly at this time when, you know, so many organizations are waiting for these funding decisions to come back. And of course, I'm referring to Arts Council MPO process, as well as like looking at how the cost of living crisis is going to be impacting all of us, as well as, you know, the impact on higher education through lots of awful changes that are happening there as well, and awful cuts. We have a couple of questions and comments in the chat, and I'm not sure if anyone from who's sort of raised a question would like to come in and mention that. Kamina's just mentioning a campaign that's been launched by Kevin Osborne, so please do check that out if you have the chance. So Sharon Gill from Yorkshire and Humber Visual Arts Network says, how can we make it possible for a white-led organisation to be recognised as an ally to diverse artists without expecting diverse artists to take on the legal responsibilities of governance? But a system of inclusive decision-making is not recorded as governance. Is there more to do about how we describe leadership? And I guess this in a way relates to some issues that Kai was talking about in terms of allyship and the work with support workers as well.
I'm happy to talk to that a little, if you like. It's a really challenging space when you are a white-led organisation, and recruiting to a voluntary board of governors, which is this, as you understand, is the established structure. You have to be in a reasonably privileged position to be able to give up your time or your expertise and all of that to support an organisation in the first place, or see a value in it, be that career-wise, or there's a reciprocity there for you. And I think it's unreasonable to expect people to do that if, as you say, the cost of living and everything in their own lives is really challenging. But then if, as an organisation, white-led, which in some parts of our country is reflective of the community they're serving, not exclusively, but it is even more challenging in some parts of the country to have a really diverse board, or a board at all, because you'll find it's the same people on multiple boards because they like sitting on boards. You know, getting young people to stay on a board is really hard because their lives move so fast, and boards don't move that fast, so they get bored and move on really quickly. So there's a massive challenge around that. So, but you have to report to all funder, to the Arts Council, as we're talking about them, about the governance of your organisation. But I don't think it tells the real story always of. So when you say only 3.4% are, you know, led by global majority, it doesn't take into account organisations that are doing their damnedest to get that voice heard, and that to get that voice into the decision making. So I think the way we look at organisations and who's making the decisions, and or how we report it, so that that data comes back in a more detailed way, really, moving forward, is my suggestion.
Do you mind if I chip in on this one? Just before you read out Sharon's question, I got a bit distracted reading it, so I have some thoughts. Yeah, I think you said a couple of things that I thought were really interesting, and I'm going to run through them really quickly while they're like still in my head, because the weather has just like made my brain feel like a bag of bees at the moment, so like really bear with. But I think it's interesting that you mentioned that board positions are unpaid because that's the expectation, right? That's the way we do things. And I think that's maybe the kind of that's what I mean when I talk about like governance needs to be re-looked at. Like we need to think about the shape of doing things, because I understand that there are professional standards and like the way that we go about doing things, there's like a professional expectation, but I think often that professional standard way of doing things is the thing that kind of gets in the way of like making change happen and like actually doing things in a way that is inclusive, right? So Kai, when you mentioned that like it's ableist to like that support worker requirement, like sometimes you just want to like be the person that like does things your way, but like professional standards get in the way, and it's like that's the ableism in that scenario, right? The professional standards don't accommodate it's one way of doing things, and I kind of get quite I get quite obsessively interested in how there's like one specific professional way of like curating a show, and maybe that one professional way of curating a show, it sets like a rubric, and it means, you know, artists are in and out, and you work with them on these like quite short-term basis repeatedly, and so they never really have any meaningful income. They're in and out, do a workshop, do a show, but like bye, see you later, you're off down the other end of the country if you want a solo show next year, right? Rather than what would it look like if an artist was brought in on payroll, like for all right, maybe a short-term contract, like maybe 24 months, but like what would 2 years worth of, and not an artist in residency, like what would it look like if you commissioned an artist for 24 months to like continuously make work? That is a residency I've just described, never mind.
But actually Strike a Light have done that in the Southwest. So they've actually done that. So they've been I think it was in the end 3 artists that they supported, and they paid them for a year, and so half of their time was like them making work, and then the other half of the time was them being an advisor to the organization. So like looking at, so basically, yeah, being there at team meetings, feeding back on like different processes, and yeah, just kind of like working through any of the organizational issues. And I think it really, you know, changed. I only heard about the process as they were in the middle of it. I don't know what they kind of like found out from the end of the process, but yeah. I know that from both sides, like the artist and the organization, found it incredible, just in terms of, you know, and I think like the Welsh Millennium Centre has also done something like that as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't know about that. I would be interested to see what that would look like and what that would do for an institution in London, because I think there is, I don't know, look, I know that there's the London bubble, but like, love this city, my hometown, I'm invested. I think London has like its own specific set of problems that I'm quite invested in unpacking. I'd be interested in finding out what that would do because I think that rapid turnover is like exacerbated by like the city's financialization. A tangent, but I think that's really interesting to know that is something that people have tried. I think as well though, Sharon, you mentioned another point about boards, being unpaid, and that it's hard to keep people interested unless they really love being on a board. And I think maybe, again, in the interest of like pointing to examples, a couple of years ago, Gabrielle, my collaborator, was critic in residence at MIMA, Middlesbrough Institute of Modern Art, and they've got like a particular way of like running their institution, or at the time they had a particular way of running their institution. I think Alistair Hudson was the director, so it was like Museum 2.0. Yeah, and the lead curator was Miguel Amado. So they had this like very specific way of understanding their work as an organization. And they spoke about visitors as constituents. They spoke about representation, specifically maybe for your question, as addressing what diversity looked like in their particular area. So for them in Middlesbrough, it was a question of looking at their local area. And, you know, Middlesbrough was, at the time, I'm not sure if it still is, but at the time it was a dispersal area for refugees. Like there was a lot of like racial diversity in the area, but then also like diversity in terms of class and socioeconomic status. And they kind of tried to address questions of diversity as it pertains to them in their local area. And I think that's a good point, that like, yeah, as a white-led organization, it doesn't necessarily do anything to kind of put a massive emphasis on token diversity then, isn't it? Like it doesn't really, you've got to kind of address it on your own terms, because otherwise, yeah, it becomes like, it's just fetishization then, isn't it? But they did something else that I thought was really interesting, which was they were quite invested in this idea of a local advisory board. And I think, I don't often make recommendations for everyone that I think everyone should do, but I think this is the one recommendation that I think every single institution, regardless of size, regardless of area, status, whatever, I think everyone should have a local advisory board. Just like, local can mean whatever you think it means, like, or whatever it means to you, that you can define that term on your own terms. But I think everyone should have a local advisory board, and I think they should be paid. But I think fundamentally, I've got this question in my mind, which is, why don't galleries ask the public what they want to see? And like how they want their institutions to run, like what they want their institutions to do? Because I mean,
this goes really back to what Saad was talking about at the beginning, actually, when you were thinking about the presence of communities and how we connect to those communities, and where we're all living and where those organizations are. And I wonder if you can just speak a little bit to that from your experiences. Yeah.
Of course, this is very subjective, but in my mind, we can, what we have is quite simple. It's an equation. We have an issue and we're trying to solve it. And we already know, well, I think that we are not going to innovate any solution. All the solutions are there. If you look at organizations all over the UK, small, medium, and big, and all over the world, there is no idea that hasn't already happened and hasn't already been replicated. And why they really work, because those ideas are very kind of relevant to where the organization is, to its community, to its history, etc. But if we look at all of these organizations, I think we share one issue where I believe personally that the real change can happen, and that's governance. And the reality is the way we're putting governance now is we're always having a middleman. You have the organization, you have this board where generally you have people that are going from board to board and are building this real expertise. And then you have your community that you're trying to serve. And there is a real disconnect between the two. While what for me would work pretty well is citizen-led organizations. We're talking, especially in the UK, we're talking about a sector that is subsidized. It's not the same sector than we have in the US. I don't think a citizen-led organizations in the US where you have a real commercial sector would work. But really where we are now, when we are talking about charities that are funded by the people, I believe they should be led by the people. And that expertise and that knowledge could really be offered. And I think if we want any radical change in the way we do things, for whom we do those things, to have a real representation where we stop talking about culture and color and class and gender and all of that, and we start really just talking about locality and having a citizen-led board that kind of changes and makes sure that that relevancy is there, Therefore, we don't have to look anymore at those kind of statistics and the 2.4% and the 1.5% that we were referring to earlier. But as long as we don't have that, the only things that we can look at to check on how representative we are as a sector is to look at those statistics. Those statistics today, I believe, are very important. They are our guide. Unless we change the way we do governance, unless we get that power and bring it back to the people and believe that the expertise, yes, is brought in by an organization that has a lot of experience, but that this organization is just an asset for its community, and therefore the direction, what needs to happen, the accountability needs to stay in the hands of the people. You could look at so many sectors that no one can afford apartments in London because we have a really powerful middleman that goes between the builders and the people that need, and we have that same thing happening in the cultural sector. What artists offer and what audiences want, there is such a huge gap between both. And then you look at who is funding this sector, which are the people, which is everyone in this call, which is our families, our friends, our brothers and sisters and parents, etc. And they're so removed. And it's very dangerous for the future of this industry, because the day when it will collapse, we need those people there. We need them hand in hand with us. And unless we give the power in their hands to direct us and to be accountable directly to them, I think we're jeopardizing the future of this industry.
Thanks. Yeah, powerful words, Saad. And I'm just aware of the time because it's a hot evening. It's a hot July evening here, and I wonder if Zarina or Kai, you have any final thoughts before I do a little wrap up, and also, yeah, any words that you want to share?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Saad and Zarina have said, and I also want to just invite everyone to be bolder in their imaginations, or one of the fact that report is inviting us to think about the future and to think about the possibility of thriving and not just surviving, which of course is also what Maya Angelou said. You know, it's not just about surviving, it's about thriving and thinking about passion and compassion. Then we shouldn't be only reactive. We shouldn't be saying, okay, I can't do this, I can't do that. You know, take a bolder step and look at how we can kind of unpack things structurally, unpick things in imaginative ways. I mean, we're in the creative sector, right? I mean, why are we trying to copy things the way they're done, or only doing things like Zarina was saying, that one so-called professional, I mean, yeah, what does that word even mean? So-called professional mode, and then to just do it and then keep doing it and then to hide behind it. I mean, come on. I mean, this is an invitation. And there's so many experts. Just look at the people on the call. We always say there's no pipeline, no. There's so many people around, and it's reports like these, it's sessions like these that really say, hey, look, we need to, yeah, I mean, we shouldn't be coming up with excuses.
Very, very true. And I think, yeah, we need more of this. We need to hold on to this energy. So thank you, Kai, for like bringing this energy and reminding us. I think it's going to be a really, really interesting time, like the next few years, in terms of what the meaning and understanding of professionalism is in the art world, particularly in relation to the Arts Council's kind of like agenda around co-creation. Zarina, I wonder if you have any final thoughts as well.
I do, but I wonder if this is a dickhead thing to say at the last minute. But I was going to throw it out here at the last minute, and just because I've been reading the comments, and I think a couple of them have kind of triggered a thought, TM, because a lot of them are like quite a lot of them cycle around this idea of like organizations as registered charities. And I think this kind of ties back to what you said, Saad, earlier about how, yeah, the Arts Council is not the only funder, but regardless of like funding sources, I think that the idea that like the majority of organisations in the UK are registered charities, like with the Charities Commission, there is like a specific governance structure that they have to follow, like you know, just to be of charitable status. And so many comments kind of point out that charitable status is like part and parcel of this. Like it's kind of it's been mentioned so many times. But I do just want to say, my dickhead comment is, I don't think that charitable status is necessarily the right fit for every organisation, and sometimes like
Absolutely. Being
a registered charity kind of gets in the way of like doing the work that we need to do. And that's such a vague way of putting it, but I think so many of the suggestions in the report and so many solutions to the problems identified in the report could kind of quite easily be circumnavigated if charitable status was just a problem that got whisked away. I spend a lot of my time chatting to I don't know, people in the arts generally, right? And so often charitable hoops to jump through is like, so often that's flagged as a problem. And I think more and more we are seeing interesting models pop up where organizations are deciding to become not-for-profit companies rather than registered charities, especially on that small scale. And so a dickhead comment, because I feel like that's just such a loose end, but something to think about maybe.
I don't think it is a dickhead comment at all. I think it's a really useful one. I just wanted to get everyone to notice the chat, please. I think you can save the chat if you would like to. There's been some really good links and comments in there. Sorry, we haven't had time to take everybody's comments in person or their questions. There's so much more to discuss, to think about, like, what stops change from happening, and actually how we can pivot towards the future and embrace this energy and actually invest the creative energy that we have into solving these problems, and really thinking about inviting and sharing this report and like putting it in front of the people who need to hear these things as well. So please do, send it to people that need to hear these things from yourselves, and we carry on doing the same thing too. I wanted to say, please do sign up to our mailing list, because we have some things coming up, including this professional development project for artists in the Northwest, as well as a series of public learning events in September that are going to be on Zoom. And I want to thank all of the speakers, to Kai, to Saad, to Zarina, to Samaya for interpreting for us today. I think I'm going to see if Paula Oral, who's director of CVAN, is around, and see if she wants to come in and say a thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you really to Cecilia and Rukhsana for your incredible work and energy in putting this conversation together. Kai, Saad and Zarina, strangely, why we always come to the conversation around governance. It's one of the most frustrating things that I consistently hear about in the art world. And it needs to be really, 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 unlocked and totally kind of pushed away. So really, thank you ever so much to you all and to the team at CVAN. You're just, brilliant to work with. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Paula. And look, we still have loads of really interesting comments and links coming into the chat. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Rukhsana, for manning personing the all of our slides and admin and everything. Amazing. Please do go and enjoy the rest of your evenings, and hope you can cool down, have a nice cool, relaxing breeze and a drink, whatever you fancy. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.